Hello, I'm Michael Dembrow. I'm the Senator for District 23, that's Northeast and Southeast Portland, and I chair the Senate Committee on the Environment and Natural Resources. That's the committee that's responsible for leading the Senate's efforts on dealing with the growing challenges related to climate change, and also for exploring the many ways in which the effort to reduce greenhouse gas pollution can be crafted in a way that can be beneficial to Oregon's economy, workers, and families, including those who are low income and who live in our rural communities. This is extremely important work. Our committee has already heard the latest report from the Global Warming Commission that let us know that Oregon is not on track to meet the goals that our state set back in 2007. And we also know now that those very goals are inadequate. We heard last week from OSU's Oregon Climate Research Institute, which was established by the legislature to survey the best climate science and let us know the particular effects of climate change on Oregon's economy, agriculture, forestry, and fisheries. Their latest report, frankly, is dire. On the positive side, there is interest in this building, as never before, in seeing Oregon step up and play a leading role in curbing greenhouse gas pollution. It's increasingly clear that action on climate change will have to happen at the state and local level, and ideally on the regional level. That must involve setting annual caps on emissions and creating economic incentives for transitioning to a cleaner economy. To that end, we find ourselves with 5 bills between the Senate and the House that seek to cap and price carbon pollution. We're meeting jointly with the House Committee on Energy and Environment today for a public hearing on those 5 bills. We expect a large turnout. We've already received a huge amount of public testimony. Then, starting next week, some of us will meet as a work group, a joint work group from the 2 chambers, on a weekly basis to really dig hard and dig deep into the various ways in which Oregon's economy could benefit from climate action. If we do it right, there is tremendous benefit for Oregon. If we don't do it right, we'll miss a real opportunity. So we've got to buckle down and make sure that we get it right. And I'll be happy to answer questions about the specifics of the bills and the work group process that's going forward. I don't know who's next. Great.
Good afternoon, and thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Kerry Neeson, and I serve as the Vice President of Advocacy and Air Quality for the American Lung Association of the Mountain Pacific. The science is clear. Climate change is a serious threat to human health, and science is not an opinion, it is evidence. Too many of us are unaware that climate change really is a threat to our public health, our communities, and our future. The American Public Health Association has coined 2017 as the Year of Climate and Health. Georges Bendeman, the APHA Executive Director, has said, "We're committed to making sure the nation knows about the effects of climate change on health. If anyone doesn't think this is a severe problem, they are fooling themselves." I'm a big fan of science fiction, and sometimes I think the effects of climate change reads like a plot from one of those disaster films. We have seen the following: decreases in the quality of air that we breathe, extreme heat, which can have a devastating impact on health, including deaths, extreme rainfall and drought, increases in the number and geographic range of disease-carrying insects and ticks, warmer water and flooding, landslides, all which increase the risk of illness, injury, and death. In short, climate change endangers human health and our well-being. The American Lung Association supports efforts and policies that will lessen climate change. Policies like these will reduce our dependence on burning fossil fuels, which adds not only climate pollution, but other pollutants into the air, which has negative effects on our air quality and our lung health, especially when it comes to gas and diesel emissions. In Oregon, we know our prevalent hotspots of poor air are along high traffic areas. Diesel exhaust in Oregon is estimated to cause as many as 460 premature deaths each year and cost up to $3.5 billion a year in healthcare costs and lost productivity. Oregon can recognize immediate improvements when we use less fossil fuels, especially among our major roadways. And the most exciting thing about this is you see immediate and real benefits to our most vulnerable populations, the very young and those living in poverty. Oregon can and should be a leader. These policies reflect Oregon's values of health, families, and healthy air. The world is moving to act on climate, but it needs leaders like Oregon to take action. We have seen longer and more intense wildfire seasons, also linked to climate change. These fires significantly reduce our air quality and affect our health in a number of ways. Smoke increases the onset of respiratory illnesses, hospitalizations due to respiratory and cardiac incidents, and medical visits for lung illnesses. Exposure to allergens causes health problems for many of us. The increase in air pollution makes the effects of increased allergens associated with climate change even worse. People with existing pollen allergies may have increased risk for acute respiratory effects. Why do we care, and who is at risk? Oregon's 700,000 youth are at risk. Much of our lung development occurs after birth. So when we have our youth exposed to bad air, it can prevent their lungs from fully developing into healthy adult lungs. Oregon has 480,000 elderly people. It's harder for them to breathe. Their bodies have been at it for a long time. Air pollution really can affect this population. Oregonians with asthma, including the 51,000 youth in our state who have been diagnosed. Those with cardiovascular disease, diabetes, and over the 500,000 Oregonians we have living in poverty. Climate change affects our families, our communities, and our public health. We owe it to all Oregonians to take action now. We need to cap climate pollution, account for its true cost to society, and reinvest in solutions that make our communities healthier.
I'm Hui Ong, Executive Director of OPAL Environmental Justice Oregon. We organize low-income people and people of color to achieve a safe and healthy environment in the places where we live, work, learn, pray, and play. OPAL exists to elevate the voices of those who are most impacted by environmental injustice. I'm here today to represent a perspective that is often missing from discussions around statewide carbon policy. Communities of color, people with low income, tribal communities, and rural people on the front lines of climate change. From high medical bills, costlier groceries, and the high price of fossil fuels, we're already paying the price for climate pollution. We are also on the front lines of failed investments in robust mass transit systems, the growing housing crisis, which results in longer commutes and greater on-road mobile air pollution, and growing income inequality. Our communities, low-income people and people of color, are dealing with these issues on top of a long history of underinvestment and, at times, state-sanctioned neglect and disinvestment. But we are here, and we have an opportunity to require major polluters to pay a fee for continuing to worsen our climate and community health, an opportunity to take those proceeds and invest in communities that have been harmed by climate inaction, and to bring the infrastructure and economic stimulus we desperately need. An opportunity to create a transition away from harmful fossil fuels economy where wealth is concentrated in the hands of a few to a clean energy economy with distributed economic and social benefits for all. Emboldened by this opportunity, OPAL Environmental Justice Oregon is excited to be a part of the conversation and engaging with decision makers and community allies together in this endeavor. The right policy with equity at the center will protect the most vulnerable from changes in energy pricing in the short term and build benefits in our communities like clean, affordable energy, better transit options, energy-saving homes, and job training opportunities for the long term. I am also encouraged that there are provisions in some of the bills that require diverse representation in any committees established by the bill. Thank you for your time, and we look forward to working with elected officials and the community at large.
Hi, welcome. My name is Kate Gordon, and I am a senior advisor at the Paulson Institute and also the founding director of the Risky Business Project, which is a project started by Hank Paulson, Mike Bloomberg, and Tom Steyer several years ago to look at the economic impacts on businesses and investors of climate change. And I'm here really to talk not about policy mechanisms, but more about the overarching need for the business and investment community to have a consistent set of policies, including carbon pricing, in order to better plan for climate risks and also better invest for opportunities in the clean energy and technology space. I have spent, since founding the Risky Business Project, about 4 years talking to and modeling the impacts of climate risk on businesses at a very granular level, including down to the county level and tide gauge level across the United States, and also spent countless hours in closed-door conversations with business and investors, including here in Oregon. And in that capacity, I have, and looking at our modeling, I know that the impacts in this state to facilities, to supply chains, to operations are significant. You just heard about some of the local modeling done there. Our modeling shows impact on from ocean acidification on the coastal economy. You've already seen a fair amount of that here in Oregon. The impacts of extreme heat and smog on labor productivity, which actually turned out to be one of the biggest economic impacts in our study. The impact of wildfires, increased risk of wildfires on forests and forested areas. And I think something we don't often talk about is the farther reaching impacts on supply chains that go far beyond the state boundaries. Supply chains of companies here go into the rest of the United States and the world, and impacts there as well. So there are risks to not addressing climate change in operations and investments in infrastructure, but there are also risks in not acting to prepare for what is a changing policy and regulatory landscape internationally on this issue. A lot of my work at the Paulson Institute is in China, and right now we see China gearing up to put in place a emissions trading system. Canada is putting a new system in place. The European Union is revising its system to make it stronger. California, the RGGI states on the East Coast are all looking at pricing carbon in myriad ways that address the realities of the changing climate and the realities of the science, which make this problem much more extreme than we thought it was even a few years ago. Companies that I have worked with, investors that I've worked with, are paying attention to these policy changes. They're evaluating their investments, their capital stock decisions based on those decisions, and they are getting ready to become leaders, not laggards, in a changing climate and policy environment. Oregon has the opportunity to do the same, to put in place a set of policies that are consistent to price carbon, to give businesses and investors some confidence that these investments are not going into a vacuum, that these investments will put them in a leadership position with relation to the rest of the country and the world. At the same time, companies that we've worked with understand there's opportunity in making these types of investments, particularly clean energy technology investments, investments in smart infrastructure. Every time a company makes a capital stock decision about a new manufacturing plant, about a new set of infrastructure, there's an opportunity to make that resilient, to make it low carbon, and to put it on the leading edge of the new climate economy. But businesses, although I feel they are doing a lot, I am very optimistic about the private sector when it comes to preparing and being rational and reasonable about these risks and opportunities. They cannot do everything. As our recent Risky Business report noted, while the private sector can do a lot, they cannot do everything. They will take the actions they need at the necessary speed and scale only if they can do so on the back of a clear and consistent policy and regulatory environment and framework that provides incentives for innovation and deployment of clean energy systems and helps businesses to adapt to climate impacts that are already baked into the system. Key to that framework is a price on carbon to better internalize the external costs of carbon pollution and, frankly, just to level the playing field so that low carbon technologies can compete. Again, I'm not here to debate mechanisms. I will say my personal bias is for a system that puts in place some amount of revenue to focus on the transition costs of such a policy, particularly to low-income communities, as you heard, but also to carbon-intensive industries that do need support in making this kind of transition. They can lead the way, but they may need a little bit of a helping hand in doing so. So I also will say, to end here, that many people talk about climate change as a far-off issue that we can deal with later. This is not a decision for another day. Every day around this state, companies are making decisions about investments. Every day, people are making decisions about their supply chains and their operations. We need to put in place today a framework that makes those decisions smarter and more resilient and less risky. So I'm excited to be here, and thank you so much for listening.
Right now, we'll open up for questions. If anybody's got any questions of any of the speakers.
Can someone explain the differences between the 5 bills?
Sure, I can. Two of them are versions of a cap-and-trade, cap-and-invest kind of system. That's Senate Bill 557 and House Bill 2135. They have a lot of similarities, but then there are also some differences for that. It makes very special provisions for environmental justice communities and making sure that revenues that would come from a carbon market would be reinvested into a just transition kind of process. It's an exciting concept that really was initiated last year with what we called the Healthy Climate Act, which was kind of the leading bill from last session, and this is it's continued to grow and mature. So we also have one House Bill 2468, which is it sets a cap, and it essentially directs the Environmental Quality Commission to come up with a system that would get us to meet those caps. Okay, it leaves the DEQ with a lot of discretion in developing the program that would accomplish that goal. Senate Bill 748 is what we call I think we're calling it a cap and penalty bill, and that too sets caps and then has a penalty schedule for companies that don't meet the cap. And then finally, we have an LC. I guess I don't actually have. Do I have the number? Yeah, LC 1242. That is in the process of being introduced on the House side. We thought we would introduce it on the Senate side, but it's a tax. It's the carbon tax, and so it had to go back and be started over on the House side. And it creates a carbon tax. So there's no cap. But there is an annually increasing tax on carbon, and the assumption is that putting that tax on emissions will inevitably lead to emission reductions.
So are these 5 competing bills, or do some of them work together?
The two cap and invest are very close. They're really versions of the same concept. The others are quite different. And I expect we'll hear testimony today with people, defending or asking us to advance, one concept or the other. Something I'm committed to this session is by the time we finish this session, we will have settled on a path. I think it's really important that we decide where we're headed and commit to moving forward on that path.
Do you have a preference yourself?
At this point, I'm inclined towards the cap and invest model, and something that would allow us to partner in some ways with California and Ontario, Quebec, Manitoba. Actually, a number of Canadian provinces are moving in this direction, and it seems to make sense. And I think that can be really beneficial for Oregon if we go that route. But I'm open, and that's why we're going to be having these weekly sessions to really dig deep. And actually, I believe that our first session, which starts next Tuesday, we're going to be focusing on risky business, which we heard about from Kate wherever she went. And it won't be her. It will actually be Hank Paulson's son. Merritt Paulson is involved in risky business here. Again, really focusing on what are the risks to business if we do nothing, and what are the potential benefits if we make a decision and start moving forward.
So who's involved in the weekly meetings?
It's convened by Chair Ken Helm, who's the chair of the House Committee, and by me. And it will be open to members of our committees, but also it's going to be actually open to all legislators who are interested, because everybody has questions. And to the extent that they can get those questions answered directly, the better we'll all be. Any other questions? Okay.